Throughout 2025, there have been several moments when politicians, journalists and political commentators, particularly those on the right of politics, have openly suggested that the UK could be heading toward an early general election. Take, for instance, this article earlier this year from The Telegraph. There could be a general election much earlier than you think. Even leaders of right-wing political parties are predicting a potential early general election.
Our debt repayments are over 100 billion a year. They're over the level of our defence budget. And the markets are getting nervy. We've seen this with 10 and 30-year gilt yields. In fact, I think my own view is that in 2 budgets' time, the markets will actually force the Chancellor into what will be a genuine austerity budget, at which point the left in the Labour Party won't buy it, and it's why I still stand by my prediction that there will be a general election caused by economic collapse that will happen in 2027.
There is growing discussion across the UK about whether political and economic pressures are quietly pushing the country toward the possibility of an early general election. What has added to this chatter is that the timing of the government's economic plans appears to collide directly with the scheduled year of the next general election, when voters, analysts and commentators see that the most painful financial measures are timed to land in 2029, the very year Britain is due to go to the polls. Questions naturally arise. These are questions not of politics, but of logic. If the toughest tax rises and the greatest financial pressures all hit in the same year as a national vote, is it strategically sensible for any government to wait until then? Or will economic conditions force consideration of an earlier election window? And this is where concerns about an early general election become even more significant. When you look closely at the fiscal plans presented at the budget, the timing of the economic pain, specifically the tax rises, are not spread evenly. It is concentrated almost entirely in the election year itself. This raises a simple but unavoidable question. Can any government realistically wait until an election year to raise taxes? When the toughest financial pressures all land at the exact moment voters head to the polls. Looking at the plans as a whole, borrowing goes up for the next 3 years. Then, in the final year, there's meant to be a sharp shift. More tax incoming in some vague, not yet specified spending cuts. On paper, that produces a big improvement by 2029-2030. In reality, it just means the good news is brought forward and the pain is pushed into the future. Chancellors have been doing this kind of thing for years. The bond markets seem fairly relaxed about it for now, but after so many missed borrowing targets, it's hard to believe that 2029 will suddenly be the moment when everything adds up perfectly. The Resolution Foundation has stated that this was a backloaded budget. Half of the government's energy bill package is only in place for 3 years, with £55 set to be added back onto electricity bills in 2029-2030. Some of the more controversial tax rises, including the £4.7 billion cut to salary sacrifice and mansion tax, are coming into effect in 2028-2029. Overall, the Chancellor's decisions today increased borrowing by £1 billion on average in the first 3 years of the forecast, 2026-27 to 2028-2029, versus savings of £24 billion on the average in the final 2, 2029-2030 to 2030-2031. This, alongside a forecast that deteriorates more at the start than at the end, leaves the public finances getting worse before they get better, with borrowing higher than this March in every year until 2029-2030 and the level of debt higher throughout the forecast. And it leaves the government set to phase out cost of living support, implement significant tax rises and cut public services ahead of the next election. This budget does have holes in it. Not small cracks, but large structural gaps that economists, think tanks and market analysts have been flagging from the moment Rachel Reeves sat down. And that is why so many analysts have described it as a buy now, pay later budget. Take, for instance, the response to Rachel Reeves' 2025 budget from Stephen Fine, the Chief Executive Officer of the investment bank Peel Hunt.
Well, other than the extraordinary scenes when the OBR accidentally leaked or published, I think, if anything, this feels very much like a buy now, pay later budget. And I think, as your presenter just before was explaining, an awful lot of this is backloaded towards the end of the 3-4 year period.
Economists point out that the Chancellor has front-loaded relief and back-loaded tax rises, meaning households get support now, but in 2028, 2029 and 2030, the tax burden sharply tightens. This timing isn't accidental. It places the toughest choices just far enough into the future that they all fall outside the political spotlight of today's debate. The economic choices made in the budget place the heaviest burdens near the end of the decade, and this is where the early election conversation intensifies. Sky News reports yet that the headroom is dependent on a couple of important factors. First, that the government will hold on to its promises to keep spending growth constrained towards the end of the decade. Second, that it will be able to raise all of the tax revenues it's promising in that year. That, in turn, gets to a deeper issue with the budget. Most of the tough stuff has been put off to the final year of the forecast, namely 2029. That year, the government will face a squeeze at the very same moment that Britons are all asked to pay more in taxes. And, critically, that's the very year Labour is due to face a general election. Does it really plan to fight an election off the back of contracting economy? All of this leads to one unavoidable conclusion. The political logic simply does not line up with the current electoral timetable, and more closely analysts examine the structure of the budget, the more they struggle to see how a government could realistically wait until 2029 before going to the polls. When you put all of the pieces together, the picture that emerges is not ideologic, speculative or partisan. It is practical. It is a picture shaped by political history, economic incentives, electoral behaviour, and the basic realities of how governments protect their standing with the public. And that is why the conversation about an early general election has grown louder, not quieter. At the heart of the issue is a simple point. No governing party voluntarily fights an election in the same year it raises taxes. It has never been a winning strategy in any era, under any government of any political persuasion. Raising taxes, especially at scale, is always politically painful, and governments typically place such measures in the early years of a parliamentary term, giving them time to stabilise the economy, allow households to adjust, and create space for positive headlines before voters return to the ballot box. Labour's current fiscal plan does the opposite of what governments usually do. By putting the biggest tax raises and hardest measures in 2029, the election year, they've created a clash between economic pressure and political reality. The clash is why so many people think the election date might change. Analysts aren't saying this because they're for or against the government. They're saying it because the plan doesn't match how governments normally operate. And the more people look at these contradictions, the more believable the early election theory becomes. When economists say the budget is backloaded, they are not merely describing the shape of the numbers. They are describing the political consequences of that shape. A backloaded budget is one that protects households today while deferring difficult decisions until later. In business, this might be seen as a way to buy time. In politics, however, timing is everything. Bringing forward the good news and pushing the bad news into the future only works cleanly if the electoral calendar is adjusted accordingly, because no party wants the campaign at the exact moment households feel the sharpest financial pressure. If the government intends to maintain stability, protect its political standing, and avoid unnecessary risk, the logic of the budget suggests that the election date must shift. And this brings us to a deeper issue highlighted by Sky News. The entire fiscal plan depends on 2029 going perfectly. Revenues must rise exactly as forecast. Spending must remain constrained under tight political conditions. Public services must absorb the pressure without major backlash. Bond markets must respond calmly. Household finances must cope with rising tax burdens. And all of this must happen in the same year that every voter in the United Kingdom is asked to decide whether the government should remain in power. Political historians can list countless examples of governments being punished for much smaller missteps than this. And that is why many commentators have looked at the plan and asked whether it is truly designed to carry the government all the way into the 2029 election. The uncertainty alone makes the current schedule look fragile. No government willingly gambles its future on a scenario where everything must go right at the exact moment the political stakes are highest. Consider too that for all the government's promises to get living standards growing this Parliament, they are currently only forecast to rise at the slowest rate since the 1950s, save for the pandemic and energy price shock period. The economic backdrop, in other words, is hardly rosy. However, this was a complex budget, and as with all bits of complex engineering, there remains a distinct possibility of large chunks of the budget failing to work. But since so much of it isn't due to kick in for a few years, it may take quite a while before we find out which bits work and which don't. And this final point about 2029 is where the early election discussion becomes impossible to ignore. When the toughest tax rises and the heaviest financial pressures are all delayed until the final year of the forecast, it creates a political and economic bottleneck that no government would normally choose to fight an election under. The question almost asks itself, is it realistic for any party to enter a general election at the exact moment the economy tightens, household budgets come under strain, and public services face increased pressure? The challenge here is not ideologic, it is structural. A fiscal plan that relies on everything going right in one single year leaves no room for error, especially when that year is also the year the country is scheduled to vote. If revenues come in lower than expected, if spending proves harder to control, or if the economy slows even slightly, the government would be forced to campaign in the most difficult possible environment. Most governments try to stabilise finances early in a parliamentary term, precisely so they can enter an election year on firmer ground. Delaying the financial pain until the very end flips that logic upside down, and that is why the possibility of an early election keeps resurfacing. The timing built into the fiscal plan does not align naturally with the electoral calendar. The closer analysts look at it, the harder it becomes to see how a government could comfortably wait until 2029 without taking a significant political risk. In the end, there is more to this story than one budget or one forecast year. What we are watching is a clash between economic planning and political reality, and only time will tell how the government navigates it. But one thing history makes clear is this: when a governing party prepares to go into a general election, it usually tries to lower taxes, not raise them. No party wants to meet voters while tightening household budgets or announcing new financial burdens. Yet, under the current timetable, that is exactly what would happen in 2029. The path laid out does not look like the path a government would willingly walk into an election year. And so the debate continues growing louder as each new detail emerges. Will the timetable shift? Will political strategy reshape the economic plan? Will events force the government's hand? No one can say with certainty right now, but based on everything we've seen, the timing, the pressure, the risks and the political incentives, many believe the possibility of an early general election cannot be ruled out. So what do you think? Do you believe the UK is heading toward an early general election? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more of the same content.